Aloha and welcome to Island Connections. I'm Ibrahim Aoude. Palestine, one state or two? With us to discuss this very important topic is Jonathan Kuttab. He's from Jerusalem, an attorney and executive director of Friends of Sabeel North America. He's also Arab American, and he also is an attorney who documents Israeli activities and crimes against the Palestinian people in Palestine, in Jerusalem. So welcome, Jonathan, for coming over to talk with us about what you do and the other organizations that you have founded and head. Also, give us more information about yourself and about the multiple organizations that you have founded.
Yeah, well, I'm an attorney, a human rights attorney. I'm admitted to the bar in New York, in Israel, and in Palestine. I've been active in human rights, helped establish Al-Haq, the premier human rights organization in the West Bank, which really received more than 45 international awards for its documentation of human rights violations, even though Israel recently declared us to be a terrorist organization. I also helped found Mandela Institute for Political Prisoners, Holy Land Trust, and a number of other organizations, including Nonviolence International. So currently I'm the executive director of FoSNA, Friends of Sabeel North America, which is a support group for Palestinian liberation theology. So in all these capacities, I've been very involved in the question of Israel-Palestine for many years.
Very good. Could you tell us about how you view Palestine now, especially given the book that you have published, which is called Beyond the Two-State Solution. So could you tell us something about the book?
Well,
and then other things about Palestine related to the book and beyond.
Well, I have to give a very brief historical background, I think, for this topic. Before the State of Israel was created, Zionism wanted to create a Jewish state in Palestine, and the Palestinian Arabs resisted. They did not want, and they refused to partition the land of Palestine into a Jewish and an Arab state. In 1948, the State of Israel was created nonetheless, and it occupied roughly 78% of the land area of Palestine, and destroying about 500 Arab villages and kicking out the majority of the Arab inhabitants who became refugees. So that's when the State of Israel was created, which I believe is shown in the map here by the green area. So between 1948 and 1967, the State of Israel existed, and the Arab world refused to acknowledge or recognize or accept it. In 1967, something new happened. When Israel started the Six-Day War, it claimed to be a defensive, preemptive war in which it captured the rest of Palestine, which is the West Bank and Gaza, as well as the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights. So Israel claimed that it had no territorial ambitions there, that all it wanted was recognition within its pre-67 borders. So this created an opportunity for a pragmatic solution. It was called Land for Peace, that Israel would return the land that it captured in 1967 and allow a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, with some kind of shared status for Jerusalem, East Jerusalem. and some qualified right of return for the refugees. This became known as the two-state solution. It was a throwback to the partition resolution, and it had a great foundation in international law, which did not allow Israel to annex the territories that it had captured in 1967. So for many years, the two-state solution was the formal, the preferred, the traditional idea for solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by allowing the Palestinians a state in 22% of the land. The problem was that the Zionist movement really did not accept the idea of the two-state solution, even though they talked about it. And they started setting up inside the West Bank exclusively Jewish settlements. So that these were areas which were totally inhabited by and controlled by Jewish individuals, not just Israelis, because Israeli Arabs were not allowed to come and live there. And it reached the point where about 700,000 Jewish settlers are living today in the area that was intended to be a Palestinian state under the two-state solution. Now, when the Oslo Agreement was signed
in 1993?
In 1994, it was intended to be the nucleus of a Palestinian state. As you can see in the map, the dark blue areas were the heavily populated Palestinian Arab areas. These were designated Area A, and they were supposed to have some kind of autonomous rule under the Palestinian Authority. The light blue areas, which are mostly the rural areas, were designated Area B, which were jointly administered by Israel and the PA. And the rest, the whitish area, is Area C, which is 62% of the West Bank, that continued to be held directly by the military government of Israel. Now, Oslo was supposed to gradually expand Area A and B to the point where it becomes a Palestinian state. Instead, that area has been frozen, and the area of the settlements was being continuously expanded. While they have more territory, more population of settlers, and an entirely separate administrative structure, which included a network of roads that were only to be used by Jews, that connected the settlements to each other and connected them to Israel. They had separate laws, separate courts, separate infrastructure, separate education, health, security systems, separate police, a fully apartheid system. But not only that, they were also fully integrated into Israel, which was taking on more and more the character of, again, apartheid that served Jews only, and not all its citizens, including the Arabs, who were 20% of Israel's citizen population. So as this reality became more and more entrenched, after 40 years of occupation, people, at least in the area, stopped talking about a two-state solution, because the reality on the ground was that there is only one state in all the area, controlled by the Israeli government and the Israeli Knesset and the Israeli High Court, with a clear and blatant preference for Jews at the expense of Arabs. Now, Palestinian Arabs were living under different legal regimes, all of which are controlled by Israel. Whether they are citizens of Israel, whether they are in the Gaza Strip under constant siege, whether they are in the West Bank living in Area A and B or even C, the reality was the same, that Israel controlled all of the land and fragmented the Palestinian or the Arab areas under different regimes.
Yeah, the Gaza Strip is the one in red, huh?
The
Right?
Gaza Strip
Yeah.
is this nice small area
In red.
with red dots on it. It's 20 miles long and between 5 and 8 miles wide. It has 2 million people living in that narrow area, and it's totally controlled under a constant siege for the last 14, 15 years, with no people or goods or services coming in or out without Israeli permission and control.
Yeah, but also they are the Israelis, the Israeli government is starving the people in Gaza. So could you say
Well,
something
there is a
about
policy of de-development
Mm-hmm.
where the entire area is really pushed back in development. Right now, they only have 4 hours of electricity. Their industry, whatever it is, has been crushed. Their agriculture is downgraded. Their water resources are 98% of the water is not potable, cannot be drunk.
They're not allowed to even fish like.
And their
no,
fishing
no.
rights are very severely restricted by the Israelis. Even though the Oslo Agreement allowed them to fish for 12 miles, they restrict them to about 3 miles. Sometimes they expand it to 6. Sometimes they prohibit it outright. But it's all under Israeli control. At one time, one journalist asked the Israeli general, "Are you trying to starve these people?" He says, "No, but I want to put them on a very strict diet." I myself thought he was joking, but later a document was leaked out to the press that the Israeli army actually calculated how many calories it takes to keep 2 million people alive, just barely alive, and that would determine how many truckloads of food would be allowed into the Gaza Strip.
Which they pay for.
Which they pay for, of course, because in this open air prison, the Palestinians have to come up with the food, with the funds, with the living materials.
Yeah. So in terms of the question of apartheid, so this is an apartheid situation. Could you say something about international law and how it defines apartheid?
Okay. Many people, when they think of apartheid, they think about South Africa. And they think, is this like South Africa or not? Now, every situation is different, and in many ways, the situation in Palestine is much worse than South Africa. Under international law today, the definition, apartheid is a crime. It's an international crime and a crime against humanity. It's subject to the jurisdiction of the International Commission, Criminal Court. It was defined in the Rome Treaty and in the Convention Against Apartheid. It has 3 elements. The first element is there has to be domination by one group over another or over others. So the system has to be created to dominate, to separate and dominate one group. Secondly, it has to be a system that is enshrined in laws and regulation, not just customs, not just I don't like to live next to a person from another race or ethnicity. The law determines what are the rights and privileges as well as freedom for each group. And third, there have to be inhuman practices that are outlined in the law, which include collective punishment, deportations, torture and imprisonment, and other forms intended to keep the domination of one group over the others. So where the three elements exist, the system is an apartheid system. For many years, people said there may be apartheid in the occupied territories, obviously, because the 700,000 settlers live in separation from, with separate roads, separate courts, separate everything from the Arab population, which lives under military orders. These days, the world is recognizing that the entire situation, including Israel itself, is based on apartheid. Because in Israel itself, the system now is more blatantly racist, more blatantly Jewish, granting Jewish people, wherever they are, anywhere in the world, including those living in the occupied territories, they have full rights of citizenship, whereas Arabs, even if they are citizens, are discriminated against systematically. There's about 63 different laws in the state of Israel, apart from the military orders in the occupied territories, that favor Jews over non-Jews. Public land, public resources, water, underground sources, these are all owned and controlled and in the service of Jews over non-Jews. So this is clearly an apartheid system, and there have been three reports, very famously over the last 2 years. One by Human Rights Watch, one by Amnesty International, and one by an Israeli organization called B'Tselem. All of them detail hundreds of pages of documentation that the entire system in Israel today is based on apartheid and privileging Jews to dominate over non-Jews in the entire area.
Yeah. Also, you know, you worked with like B'Tselem, for instance, and you document those kinds of, you know, crimes against humanity in terms of international law, etc. The relationship between like your organization, Al-Haq, and let's say Amnesty International, you know, is there like some kind of relationship?
Yeah, we have very good relationship with all these organizations, and these relationships are based on the concept of universality of human rights and of international law. Universality means that the same principles apply throughout the world. If we say that torture is illegal and bad, that means it's illegal regardless of who the victims are. You can't just say these are bad guys, we can torture them. It's also regardless of who the perpetrator is. You can't say these are our people, these are good people. That's the US government. It can use these practices of torture in Guantanamo, for example, or elsewhere.
Or Iraq.
Or Iraq or elsewhere. Universality means the same standards, the same rules apply to everybody. So we have excellent relationship with B'Tselem, an Israeli organization, with Amnesty International, with Human Rights Watch, because we are operating with the same set of rules and regulations.
Yeah, that is important. So Al-Haq organization, even though it does all these kinds of good things and documentation in the support of human rights, international human rights law, nevertheless, the State of Israel and Palestine, you know, listed you as a terrorist organization. So, could you say something about that?
Well, for 40 years now, they've been saying the same thing. First, they accused us of being an arm of the PLO,
Palestine Liberation
Organization, and we showed that we are really independent. And then they said we are a terrorist organization because they didn't like what we were doing. I think it is especially now because we are documenting and preparing files on individual Israeli politicians, including the defense minister, to present them to the International Criminal Court as war criminals. So obviously the defense minister doesn't like that. So he wanted to close us down, and he wanted to declare us a terrorist organization. He also wanted to prevent the Europeans and others from funding our activities. So the Europeans said, where is the evidence? This is a research organization. It's internationally known. We have received more than 45 international awards for our careful documentation. And I says, oh, we have secret evidence. So it's okay. We said, why don't you share that secret evidence? If not publicly, share it with the CIA. Share it with the European intelligence agencies. And they shared whatever information they had. And even the CIA had to say there is nothing there. They're clearly not terrorist organization. They're clearly a genuine human rights organization.
Yeah. So you mentioned some of the activities, Israeli activities, recent ones in the West Bank, like using children as human shields, shooting people on the streets, etc., etc. Could you say something about what happened in the past, like, I don't know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
Actually, we are seeing a major escalation in the behavior of the Israeli army and the Israeli settlers. Part of it, I think, is because they can get away with it. When they shot a world-famous known journalist, Shireen Abu Akleh, who is also a U.S. citizen. And she was shot on camera. Everybody could see that she was deliberately shot. And there were international reports on the incident, including the Americans were involved in reporting on the incident. And the Israeli response was, we're not going to have our soldiers put on trial just to get applaud from the international community. So that was like a clear signal to the soldiers. You can do whatever you want. You will not be tried. You will not be called to terms on it. And the settlers also got the same message. You can do whatever you want to the Palestinians, and our soldiers will defend you, rather than defend the local population. So we've seen a major uptake. Almost every single day there is a martyr or two, many of them children, almost all of them unarmed, and none of them, in a situation where they create a danger to the soldiers or the settlers who shoot them. We have also seen that the behavior of the settlers also towards foreign volunteers who try and help the Palestinians and provide some protection by their very presence, they get beaten up too, and they get attacked. And we're seeing younger and younger and younger children being shot or being arrested or being beaten up by the Israeli forces. And we also see an increase in administrative detention, which means you arrest somebody and hold them with no trial and no charges for 6 months, renewable. Right now there are over 800 Palestinian Arabs, not a single Jew, who are under administrative detention, who are in jail. So this is a major escalation. And part of it, I think, is, as I said, because of the impunity, but part of it because everybody has given up on the two-state solution. It's clearly not going to happen. That is why I wrote this book, Beyond the Two-State Solution, which can be obtained from Amazon, or it can be downloaded for free from the website of nonviolenceinternational.net. You can download it in English or in Arabic or in Hebrew. It's available. In this book, I try to say, if we give up on the two-state solution, what do we do? Is there a possibility for the 7 million Jews who live in Palestine and the 7 million Arabs who live in the greater Israel area to live together on the basis of equality. Can we think of one state which allows them to live together without giving up their ideologies? The only thing they have to give up is exclusivity. They must share the land. It can be a Jewish state and at the same time an Arab state. It can be an Arab state, but at the same time half the people living in it are Jewish, and they have to live as full, equal citizen within the same framework. And I think it is possible.
Yeah, and I think like Ilan Pappé, who's an Israeli Jew and who wrote the book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, he is of the opinion that you know, a one-state solution is the way to go. Also, Miko Peled, who's an Israeli citizen, and his pedigree is like Zionist, you know, and his maternal grandfather was one of the signatories in terms of the creation of the State of Israel. He is for a one-state solution now. So there's a huge push towards that. Yeah. So could you say more about that?
There is a small number of Israelis, you are right, who feel that that is necessary. Unfortunately, the majority of Israelis feel that they have won. They have the whole thing. They own the whole thing. They control and dominate the whole thing. So people who have privilege don't give up their privileges easily. If there isn't enough pressure, internal and external, the slave owners want to keep the slaves. The colonizers want to keep their colonies. To tell them you have to give everybody equal rights is not easy unless you explain to them that the current situation is unsustainable, that it cannot go on this way. That for their own sake and for the sake of their children and grandchildren, if they want to live in peace, that is a possibility.
Especially now that Palestinian resistance has, you know, mushroomed, you know, both like peaceful and, you know, resistance with the rocks and machine guns sometimes. Or so could you say something about that thing?
Yeah, I don't think Palestinian armed resistance has any chance against to out-violence the Israelis. I mean, they have nuclear weapons,
right.
as well as a very, very effective traditional army with airplanes and bombs and rockets and
the whole thing,
tanks and navy, the whole thing. The question is, can you keep 7 million people under subjugation indefinitely when you have such a small country? I mean, this is not the situation of Europeans in the United States, where the numbers
huge,
overwhelmingly are in favor of them over the indigenous population. Here you have two equal populations numerically. Can you keep them under constant subjugation? Can you keep them under apartheid? Is apartheid possible anymore in the 21st century? I mean, if we're talking 2 or 3 centuries ago, maybe you could do it because ethnic cleansing was okay. Annexation was fine. Even the word colonialism was not a dirty word. The Zionists initially said, we are here to colonize and bring European Jewry into this area. Today, in the 21st century, with an international regime of human rights, with human progress, where we don't accept apartheid or racism. Yes, they exist, but they are condemned, and they are not acceptable, certainly not in the Western world. If Israel wants to be part of the Western world, if it wants to be called a democracy it has to find some way to give equality to non-Jews within its borders.
Yeah, so the Zionist state in Israel and Palestine basically is running against time. You know, time is not in its favor, given all these kinds of international humanitarian law, etc. And those kinds of practices are no longer, you know, a lot of more people in the world are coming up against it. As you say, Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and the rest of those people. Yeah,
people don't realize it, but we live in an interconnected world. Everybody depends on everybody else. South Africa, when the apartheid regime broke up, was very powerful and had the support of the United States and England and the big corporations. Until almost the very end, they thought that they had domination of the entire, you know, southern African continent. But this kind of regime is not sustainable in the long run. And I don't think it's sustainable in Israel-Palestine.
Yeah, actually wanted to introduce this thing in terms of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine and the crimes that are, you know, like if you go to the Israeli archives, military archives, you find those kinds of documentation for the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. There's also the Plan D, Plan Dalet, is very famous or infamous in terms of showing how the Israeli or how the Zionists basically prepared for this ethnic cleansing, etc. Now, Benny Morris and some other writer, I forgot his name, they're talking about, from the Israeli archives, about biological warfare committed against Palestinians in 1948.
Yes.
Through like poisoning the wells and the rest of it. So I don't know if you have more information about that.
Yes, that is true. But what I want to emphasize is that while many of these practices have been occurring since 1948, the situation in the world has changed. And in 1948, the world had just come out of World War II. There was a lot of sympathy for Jews who had just been basically subjected to genocide. There was a lot of guilt in the Western world about their own anti-Semitism for millennia, their failure to give proper respect and freedom to Jews within their communities. And the Holocaust had just occurred. So people were very sympathetic to the idea of a Jewish state. They did not think through what it meant for other people. My own daughter, last year she called me and says, "What's happening in Sheikh Jarrah? Could you explain it to me?" Sheikh Jarrah is a neighborhood in East Jerusalem where the settlers were moving in and taking Arabs' houses. So I explained to her exactly what was happening. And she says, "But Daddy, there's nothing new there. They have been doing that all these years." I said, "Yes, they have, but the world has changed. Today, the world looks at this and says this is not acceptable. This is ethnic cleansing. This is racism. This is apartheid. This is not allowed. This is a war crime." So the kind of things that Israel got away with in the past, it no longer can get away with today.
Yeah, not as easily at least, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. So, could you say more like about detaining children? And when we say children, you get like from 3-year-old till like 17,
well,
or so.
Under Israeli military orders, you can only arrest somebody who's 12. But that doesn't stop them from arresting, terrorizing, frightening children. Under international law, minors are those who are below 18, and there has to be a special regime for them. You have to, when you arrest them, you have to involve the social services. Their parents have to be aware of what's happening. They have a right to a lawyer, and if they can't afford a lawyer, they'll be provided. What the Israelis do, though, is they try to terrorize these children. So instead of calling them, summoning them to the police station, they would go into their homes at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, bang on the door, break the door, go in, beat them up in front of their parents, blindfold them, and drag them to the Jeep, beat them up in the Jeep, interrogate them for 2, 3, 4 days, try and force them to sign a confession that they were throwing stones or involved in some other activity. And then even if they can't get them to sign a confession, the entire activity is intended to terrorize and intimidate them and scare them and bludgeon them into submission. Now, you may do that to a small group of people for some time, but you cannot do that to an entire nation indefinitely without getting a reaction.
Yeah, so resistance increases in that,
Absolutely.
and mostly like peaceful resistance, etc. So could you say something about international action in defense of Palestinian rights and against Israeli crimes, in terms of what we call BDS, and if you can say something about that?
Well, many Palestinians, realizing that what's happening is against international law, they appeal to the United Nations. However, in the United Nations, the United States uses its veto to defend Israel, even when Israel is clearly wrong and is violating international law and is violating even US policy, which at least until the previous administration did not accept the settlement activities and thought that they were also illegal or unhelpful to peace and to the two-state solution. So when the government doesn't do something, civil society, students, unions, churches get involved, demonstrating, boycotting, calling for divestment, and calling for sanctions. This is what brought down the apartheid regime.
In South Africa.
In South Africa. It was civil society basically saying, we will boycott those who violate international law, even if our own government doesn't. We will divest and ask the corporations to divest from those who are implicit in violating international law. We demand sanctions. You should kick them out of FIFA, or kick them out of Eurovision, or kick them out of academic organizations or institutions if their own academic institutions are involved in apartheid and in crimes against humanity. So Palestinians appeal to the international community to work non-violently. We don't want people to send us arms like the Ukraine. They're always saying, please send us more weapons. We don't want you to send us weapons. We want you to help us non-violently to work for equality, to work for human rights, to work for ending the oppression against us. So instead, the Zionists in this country, and by that I include not just Jewish but Christian Zionists in this country, try to make BDS, boycotts, divestments, and sanctions, illegal. There's 23 states now who have passed legislation saying if you use BDS against Israel, we will punish you.
But that's against the First Amendment, U.S. First Amendment.
Of course it is. Boycott is essentially freedom of expression. And the courts that have looked at it have said It is against the First Amendment, and right now it is going to go to the Supreme Court, and who knows with this court what will happen. But right now, any American in these 23 states who wants to do any business with the state, including a teacher who wanted to teach special ed classes, was told she must sign a declaration that she will not boycott the state of Israel or anything under the state of Israel, including the settlements. We'll see what the courts will say. I trust that they will go with the Constitution. But even if that's declared unconstitutional, still you have to spend so much time and energy and money to defend yourself against this anti-BDS legislation that it exhausts you. Instead, it should be just obvious. We are opposed to racism, and we are opposed to apartheid, and we are opposed to practices that violate human rights.
Yeah. So now I want to go to your visit to Hawaii.
Yes.
So could you give us some idea about what you have so far done? Where did you go?
Well,
and what you still have to do before you leave
well,
Hawaii?
I'm the executive director of FoSNA, Friends of Sabeel North America, which is a group in the United States that supports Palestinians, particularly Palestinian Christians, who are working for justice and peace, non-violently, or the Sabeel ecumenical theology. So we have a chapter in Hawaii. We have people who either attended some conferences here in the United States or who have visited the Holy Land themselves and who saw the situation for what it is and who are working for Palestinian justice. So FoSNA attempts to be a Christian voice for Palestine and for nonviolence and for peace. And so we invite you all to, if not become a member, at least check out our website, FoSNA.org, FoSNA.org. There are some articles. There's some information about what is happening there, which is very useful to do. And I give lectures, like I give interviews like this one, speak in churches. We'll be speaking at the convention of the Episcopalian Church tomorrow. Meanwhile, I am enjoying your wonderful state.
Tomorrow meaning 21st of October. Yeah,
correct.
Yeah, because we're gonna show this episode in November. Because we missed the October show. Yeah.
I'm also learning about some of the issues in Hawaii about water rights and indigenous rights, and people wanting to live as equals and have their own traditions and cultures respected, rather than having large corporations control their water, land, resources.
Yeah. So you mentioned this leads me to see like some kind of connection between Hawaii and Palestine regarding water resources, for instance. So some Israeli practices to deny Palestinians their own land. They built a wall that separates Palestinians from their farms so that they cannot like eke out an existence on the farm, etc. And water and seizing more land, depriving them from harvesting their olive trees, etc. Could you say something more about
Well, you see, it all starts with the concept of a Jewish state. If the state is intended to serve Jews and Jews only, then public sources such as land, such as water, is there to serve the Jews, not to serve all the citizens equally. So you must control how much water is allocated to the Palestinians, and you must control underwater sources. All the aquifers are owned by Mekerot, the Israeli Water Authority, which takes that water, gives it to the Jewish settlers, and gives it to Israel, and doesn't allow Palestinians even to drill for water on their own land and within their own territories. So if you begin with the concept that this state is here to serve Jews wherever they are, they can come here and this becomes their state, rather than it's here to serve all the people, Jews and Arabs, who are its citizens and residents within its borders. This is the crime of apartheid. This is what racism means, and this is what discrimination means. And if you say anybody who challenges the Jewishness of the state, anybody who demands equality, then you say these people are anti-Semitic. These
on
people,
what grounds?
On grounds that they are refusing to accept a Jewish state, Jewish supremacy, in a Jewish domination in this state. And then anybody who opposes that is a security threat, is a terrorist. Even if, like me, he's a pacifist, he becomes a terrorist. Even if he's working for human rights and for coexistence, he's a terrorist because he doesn't accept Jewish domination.
And you are Arab American as well, you know.
Yes.
I mean, so the U.S. has nothing
to do. Just like the Shireen Abu Akleh, who was a well-known journalist and a U.S. citizen and a Christian also. She was shot directly and deliberately. And all the cameras and all the reports have been made, including a report by the New York Times, which is not a pro-Palestinian paper. They said that she has been shot by Israeli soldiers. It was a deliberate attempt to silence her and to silence the reporting on what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, that is, you know, something. You mentioned, you know, about detainees, like there's 800 detainees, etc.
Administrative detention.
Yeah, administrative detention. So could you say something more about that? But also, like, how many prisoners are there in Israel? Detainees?
Oh my goodness. The number fluctuates. It's usually about 5,000. Almost all of them are convicted in military courts, primarily on the basis of a confession. And the confession is taken under torture during a period when somebody has no access to a lawyer or to other prisoners. And when they are subjected, it's allowed under Israeli law, they can use, quote, moderate physical pressure, including shaking, as well as psychological pressure, including sleep deprivation, position abuse, and other forms of what everybody would call torture. But even those who are not subjected to military courts and who are not convicted, they can still be arrested, no charges and no trial for up to 6 months, renewable. Right now we have about 800 Palestinian detainees who are there. They don't know why, they don't know for how long.
And some of them like been there for 30 years and stuff.
Not 30 years, but some of them have been there for several years. I think the longest these days is about 6 years. Detainees, the administrative detention. But they say, why am I here? Well, secret evidence. We won't tell you why, and we don't tell you for how long.
So how would they resist these guys?
Sometimes they go on hunger strikes. There was one who went on for a hunger strike for over 100 days. He shriveled down into something really, really horrible. Aoude. And the Europeans especially were absolutely shocked at the picture of this man who was shriveled down and is still basically shackled to his hospital bed. And the Europeans were totally outraged. Says, you have to release him. Or try him, put him on trial, and tell us why he's there. Eventually, they released him, but a few weeks after that, they decided to detain him again. Once he became strong enough for
so he's still detained.
Still under administrative detention. So, I mean, even if people are not kept under administrative detention, the threat is always there. You can be just taken and put in jail.
Yeah, some of them who've been in jail for 30 years, 40 years, etc. They are cancer patients, etc., and they don't allow them to. They don't release them.
Correct. Correct.
So could you say something more about that?
You see, in
terms of abuse within the prison,
in a proper society, people are put in jail to punish them for what they did, to deter others, and there's a fixed period, and then there's a possibility of parole after 2/3 of the period. Palestinian security detainees are political prisoners. They don't get parole after 2/3 of their period. Sometimes they finish their period and then they are rearrested again under administrative detention. The arrest there is totally punitive. It's a method of controlling the population. It's a method of trying to tell those Palestinians there's no such thing as Palestine. You don't exist as a human being with equal rights with anybody. It's there to crush their spirits, maybe turn them into a collaborator. Come and work for us. And tell on your fellow, we'll let you go if you will become a collaborator and work with us. But if you insist, I'm a Palestinian, I'm a human being, I have my identity, I belong to this land, then you are a threat to the state, because this state is only for the Jews. And if you don't accept that this state is only for the Jews, you are a threat to us.
One quick thing, like Israeli government says, and Zionists also who support the Israeli government, say that actually the Palestinians in Israel, they don't call them Palestinians in Israel, call them Arabs in Israel, are much better taken care of than Arabs or Palestinians elsewhere, in Lebanon and Syria, etc. So could you say something about the rights of Palestinians who are citizens of Israel?
Yeah, that's the colonial argument that was used in South Africa, that blacks in South Africa are better than blacks in Uganda or other African states. But the criteria for justice is not how do I compare with people in other faraway countries. Yeah, I'm sure we are maybe better off than people in North Korea. So what? We live here. This is our land. We want equality here. Don't compare me to what's happening. African Americans were told that for a long time. Slavery is fine because you're better here than in Africa. It says no. Well, under slavery you have full employment. You didn't have to worry about unemployment under slavery. I say, no, I want to be free, and I want to be equal, and I want to be treated as a human being.
So some of the practices, like, the Land Day in Palestine, was it 1970 or? I think, 1970, I think. But it was March 31st, I guess. It happened to citizens of the state of Israel who are Palestinian. They robbed them of their own lands. And then now it becomes a national holiday for all Palestinians everywhere, including in Hawaii.
Yes.
Yeah, so could you say something about
it? You see, Israel creates separate regimes for different portions of the Palestinian population. We're fragmented. They tell us you're not one people. Some of you are citizens of the state, and you will be treated differently. But in reality, they are treated the same in terms of the Jewishness of the state, the domination of Jewish power over non-Jews. So we take your land, and if you protest, we will shoot you.
Yeah,
We will kill you.
In fact, they killed 13 people.
Exactly. Even though you are doing a peaceful demonstration, it's sort of reminder to us that the Palestinian people, whether they are Israeli citizens, whether they are Jerusalem residents like me, whether they are in Gaza under siege, whether they are in the West Bank living in area A or B or C, whether they are refugees in the diaspora, we are one people. We have a clear identity, we have a clear connection to the land, and we cannot be denied. We're not saying that the Jews have to be kicked out or thrown in the sea. We're saying we have to live together on the basis of equality.
Which basically means that if they still believe in exclusivism as Jewish or as Zionists or as non-Arab or non-Palestinian, then can you get that kind of equality drilled into their own system?
Equality comes as a result of struggle, internal and external. And the demand for equality and the fight against Zionism is not a fight against Jews. It's a fight against racism and apartheid. I'm proud that there are many Jews who participate in the fight against Zionism and against the apartheid of the State of Israel. This is what we want. We want equality, and we are entitled to it.
Yeah, and boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is an important part for international support of Palestine. Could you say more about that?
It's a non-violent movement supporting the Palestinian struggle for freedom, for the right of return, for equality, and for the end of the occupation of Palestinian lands. And it is non-violent, and it's how the rest of the world can show its solidarity and support and tell the State of Israel, you're entitled to live there, but you're not entitled to dominate another people and deny them of their rights. Again, our call is for equality. Our fight is against Zionism and racism, discrimination and apartheid. It's not a fight against Jews.
Yeah, and then like Palestinians like me, I am Palestinian in the diaspora, can go there and visit, live if they want, have a condo there or something like that. Yeah, because there's like how many people, Palestinians are outside of geographic Palestine?
2/3 of the Palestinian people live outside geographic Palestine. And if Jews can claim the right to return after 2,000 years, certainly you have the right to return after 70 years, 50 years.
Sure.
Whatever.
Okay, well, it's been a pleasure, discussing this important matter with you. Thank you very much, and wish you all the more luck in terms of discussing this with other people in Hawaii, etc. before you leave. And please come back again. You're more than welcome in Hawaii. Mahalo nui loa. We reached the end of our program, and hope to see you again. Aloha.